Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Part of some of the work that we're doing in diversity for Pikes Peak Library District is bringing speakers in that can speak to you from the life of some of the books and some of the individuals in our history to kind of bring them to life for you. My name is Shirley Martinez, and I'm the director for Pikes Peak Library District Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Department. And so we're happy that you could come out today. We're happy that we have this virtually, so we have virtual individuals at home watching. So we really appreciate you coming out and hearing today. So we are bringing to you during this month of Martin Luther King Jr. The celebrations of the work that he's done and the work that continues to happen by people like you and people like the people from the library district. So I'm going to give you a little bit about Isaac, who is the nephew of Martin Luther King Jr., and who still continues to do a lot of the work with the family. So Isaac Newton Farris Jr. is the nephew of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and attended his uncle's alma mater, Morehouse College, where he majored in political science. Mr. Farris's background has given him a unique perspective and real-life experience on some of the most pressing issues of our times and to our future. Growing up in one of America's most socially, politically active families has provided him with a front row seat, witnessing how policy is formulated and implemented. Mr. Farris has worked with political figures such as Walter Mondale, Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, and the successful county commissioner election of Martin Luther King III. He served as CEO of the Clean Air Industries, president and CEO of Martin Luther King Jr. Center, and president and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization his uncle Martin Luther King Jr. founded. Mr. Farris currently serves as a senior fellow of the King Center, where he not only continues to write and research and lecture on life, philosophy, and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., but also on how the Kingian nonviolence should guide American society as we confront social, religious, economic, and war issues of America and the world that we have today. We are fortunate enough to have him visit us in our city and our county, and we were with children yesterday at several schools, and it's just amazing how they read the stories and they speak to someone from the family, and their questions are just amazing, and how astute they are, and how they can just embrace people no matter who they are. Because they, like one of the kids said, everybody's welcome here. And so without further ado, I will introduce Mr. Isaac Newton Farris.
Thank you, Shirley, for that great introduction. And hello to all of you. How y'all doing today? Good. It's great to be here. I want to speak to you just briefly because I want to give you an opportunity maybe to interact with me a bit and ask any questions that you might have. But I do want to speak a little to you briefly about where we are in America and why we need to more than ever look to the teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. America is entering a crucial point in the life of our country. We're entering a phase of the best of times, but also potentially the worst of times. I think it's the best of times because of the demographic change that our country is currently going through. In 15 years, there will be no overwhelming majority race. There will be no overwhelming majority Christian or religious denomination. As far back as 1980, the population of America was 80% American whites. That has changed drastically, and I believe that in 1980, 85% of the country were Christians. That has changed. It's changing. America's continuing to grow. It's now about to become the melting pot that we've talked about for years, but it's actually about to happen. And so what does that mean? It means that we've all got to figure out how to get along together. That we all have to figure out how to accept the differences that might exist between us. We've got to communicate with each other. And if we do that, according to Kingian nonviolent principles, what we will discover is that we have a lot more in common than we do in difference. Everybody loves America. That's why everybody wants to come to America, for what America represents, the freedom that America represents, to be your best self, to not be guided by any political or ideology that is forced upon you. Right now, for any of you that are paying attention, we're in a crucial point for our democracy here in America. And there's a misperception that we at the King Center are doing our best to stop. And that is this whole idea you've been hearing, and maybe you've heard about it from the discussions around the filibuster as it relates to the Voting Rights Act. Unfortunately, there's been a perception for many years that the Voting Rights Act is a black law, that only it impacts black people. That can be nothing further from the truth. Before the Supreme Court ruled that the formula for pre-clearance, and pre-clearance meant that if a state was going to change any voting procedures, they'd have to seek approval from the federal government to assure that there is not any voter suppression or racial discrimination involved in the new policies. Before that was done, there were 13 states that by law were under pre-clearance. One of those states was the state of Alaska. I think there are about 2 people, black people in Alaska. But it was done. Alaska qualified for that designation because, as you might know, I'm sure you do know, that Alaska was the last state admitted to the Union. There were people that lived there before, Native Alaskans that lived there before they became a part of America. So that Alaska qualified to make sure that we new Americans did not discriminate against the Native Alaskans that were there. Point being, everybody deserves the right to vote because that's your way of participating in what happens in your society. So one, I would encourage all of you to not think of this as just a civil rights issue, even though it is civil rights, and civil rights impact all people, not just black people, but due to the history of our country, when we talk generally about civil rights, it generally involves the rights of American blacks. But this impacts everyone sitting in this room. This impacts everyone sitting in this room. In my state of Georgia, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, you might have heard of some of the shenanigans that our state legislature has done. Voter suppression is wrong, but I can overcome voter suppression. Voter suppression is, when they, close down 20 voting precincts down to 10, right? So you might have to travel way across town to get to a voting precinct. But you can still get there, right? You can still cast a vote. It might be harder to do it. What I can't overcome, what you will not be able to overcome in your state if we don't stop what's happening in Georgia, Arizona, and 9 other states, is there's a law in Georgia that says that the state legislature can disqualify legally cast votes for any reason that they deemed necessary. So, in essence, what happened in my state, I'm sure you've heard about this, and this has nothing to do with whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. This has to do with about you being an American citizen. We had a scenario in 2020 after the election. The sitting president called our Secretary of State and said, who's responsible for counting the votes, and said, look, I need 10,000 more votes so I can win this state. I need 10,000 more votes. Gosh, Mr. President, I love you. I'm supporting you. I voted for you. But I mean, how can I give you 10,000 more votes? How can I do that? I'm not even getting involved in the shenanigans about, what you might have heard about, ballots being switched and all of that. Bottom line, he didn't have the legal authority to do what the president was asking him. In 2024, if things don't change, somebody, the Speaker of our House, will have the authority to find the 10,000 votes. And you know how they will find the 10,000 votes? They will come to my city, Atlanta, and say, hey, 10,000 of those votes are not good votes. We're disqualifying them. As I said, that's something right now. It's not even put in racial terms. Right now, it's being put in political terms. Republicans versus Democrats. But it won't stop there if this is allowed to happen. I assure you, you will be impacted by this. There might be some referendum that you go to vote for, that you want to see happen in your community. It won't have anything to do with race relations or anything like that. It might be something as, hey, we'd like our tax dollars to build more libraries. But if there is someone who doesn't like the outcome of that election, and your state, Colorado, adopts the same type of law that Georgia and Arizona have, legislature can just simply say, yeah, well, they said we need more libraries, but I don't think we do. So let's disqualify some of those votes so that the referendum does not win. So please, this is not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. It's not a black thing. It's not a white thing. It's not a Christian thing. It's not a Muslim thing. It's an American thing. And that was the greatness of my uncle. He wasn't a black leader. He was a human rights leader. Just so happened at the time, the issues that he was dealing with primarily affected American blacks. But I can assure you, if the case was reversed and he, as an American black, saw American whites that were being treated like American blacks were during the 60s, he would have given the same I Have a Dream speech. He would have put his life on the line just as vigorously because he accepted one principle that we all should accept, and that is that, and not to offend any of the non-religious that might be in the audience, but we're all the children of God. And so therefore we are responsible to and for one another. Black, white, male, female, homosexual, heterosexual, transsexual. All of us were in the same boat. As my uncle said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters or perish together as fools. And that, in one respect, we're on that course here in America to perishing. On the other hand, we're on the course to, like I said, being that great melting pot. One of the things that has fascinated me since the George Floyd police murder is how many people that are not considered black, not considered or don't see themselves as white, but who now are embracing the fact or now proclaiming themselves as a person of color. We've seen this happen specifically a lot in the Asian community. But the reality of it is that we're all people of color. Some of us are white, some of us are black, some of us are tan. You remember that red, yellow, black, and white? We're all precious in his sight. We're all people of color. And that's why the melting pot is going to be so beautiful. You won't, no longer in 15 years, you won't be able to identify who is an American based on their skin color. This is not 1980 anymore. So, to me, that's a good thing. Because we've lived too long in this country where we judge people by how they look. And that's different from us, is the point that I'm making. As if that means something. It means nothing. But now, we're getting ready. Truly, we're in that final stage. Because we, keep in mind, we were not true. We called ourselves for over 100 years a democracy. But it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act that we truly became a democracy. How can you have a democracy when some people in your community can't vote? Just based on the color of their skin. So we weren't a true democracy until 1965. And now we're at the point where we're in that final stage. You know, it's good to read in books and to hear politicians and people talking about America the beautiful and the great common sense of the American citizen. Now all of that's getting ready to be tested because we are going to have to learn how to live with each other. And believe me, that sounds harder to do than it is actually to do. Because I'm telling you, I travel the world, been exposed to all types of people. And I can guarantee you that most people have more in common than they do difference, than they have difference. Doesn't mean that the whole country has to become Democratic, Republican, or whatever. What it does mean is that we hear each other, we respect each other, that we're in constant dialogue with each other. Doesn't mean that because we're in dialogue that we're always going to convert people to how you think. That's the beauty of us, of being a human being. We're all individuals with brains and minds and whole hearts and souls. And the ability to form our own thoughts and feelings about things. That's what has made us the greatest country in the world. The freedom to do that. We don't want to change that. But we do want to communicate more with each other. We do want to hear more of each other, not just talking at each other. not defining people by who they voted for or what political party they're part of, but accepting the fact that we're all human beings, that we all, if we're cut, bleed red blood. We all need the same things to live. We all want our children to grow up in a safe community, to have that access to build their minds. We all want that. We all want elected leaders who will do the right thing for us. We all want the ability to put those leaders out of office if they're not doing the right thing for us. We all want to live. We all want to enjoy life. So let's do it. But let's first accept the fact that there will be differences among us. Let's accept the fact that that can be a good thing. One of the reasons why I cherish the job that I have is because I do come into contact with so many people that are different from me. And what I've learned, and I got a lot of people know, I probably know more people like me than I know different from me. But because I've been exposed to so many people different from me, I've learned one thing. I don't really learn much from the people like me. I don't. I learn best when I'm with people who are not like me, right? I mean, truly, I learned some new stuff that I accept. I learned some new stuff that I don't accept. But I learned new stuff. You can only get that by being around people that are different than you. So we are on the cusp of the best of times in America, if we will let it happen. If we will let it happen. And I assure you that the basic way of communicating, the basic way of getting along is your right to vote, to express your opinion. Now, I'm telling you, right now, it's about maybe Republicans trying to shut down Democrats. But if this is allowed to happen, it will not stop there, I promise you. Next, it'll be Christians saying, are Muslims true Americans? We need to disqualify their votes, or should they be getting, government funds? I'm telling you, we got to stop it now. Please do your part to make that happen. That doesn't mean that you have to join a protest. That'll be good. We'll welcome you there. But you don't have to do that. If you're just talking to people you know, and reminding them, hey, this just thing's about black people, right? This is about us. So make sure you communicate to who your chosen leader is, your views on it. And there are any number of ways, the internet makes it easy now, so it's easy to communicate with your officials. And on that subject, I want to remind you all that after we have secured the right to vote, then we need to do it. And not just for president. I can tell you right now, regardless of who you voted for, whether it was Trump or Biden, the most important person, the elected official to you, is your city councilman, your school board representative, and your state legislator. These people are more important to you, impact your everyday life more than President Trump or President Biden ever will. It starts here at the local level. So once we have secured it, make sure that you vote in every election. Make your voice be heard. So yes, we're approaching the best of times, but we will live in the worst of times if we don't stop what's happening here now. To me, for those of you who have followed it, our congressmen, our senators seem to always be able to figure out how to do what's important to them, regardless of their House rules or their Senate rules. You know, right now, there's this whole thing about the filibuster, and, you know, I'm for voting rights. I think we should do it, but then, you know, you got this filibuster, and that's going to stop us from doing it, and I just don't think we should change the filibuster, even though we just changed it 2 weeks ago to pay debt. And we needed to do that. We needed to do that. The world's economy relies on America. America can never afford not to pay its bills because it affects the entire world. The entire financial system is built on the strength and credibility of the American dollar. And it essentially says that if you're owed that dollar, you will be paid that dollar. Government guarantees that. So we needed to do that. But I must tell you, my friends, your right to vote is more important than any economic issue that can occur. What's the use in having a strong dollar if we're living in Russia? If we no longer had a right to say what happens with that dollar. So, in conclusion, a lot of times I get asked, hey, what do you think is the best way to celebrate your uncle's holiday? What should we do on the King holiday? Well, many of you might not know, the King holiday was established in 1984, first celebrated officially in our country in 1986. In 1996, 10 years later, my aunt, Coretta Scott King, returned to the Congress and asked them to change the designation of the King holiday. Reason why we did that is because we didn't want the King holiday to be a day of hero worship. Now, don't get me wrong, and I'm biased in saying this. I think my uncle is, one of the greatest Americans ever produced. And he deserves any praise that people give him. But if he were here, he would say, look, dude, don't sit around talking about me. Get out and do something to help somebody if you want to honor me. Right? So the designation that we asked, and it didn't and doesn't get much recognition, but not only was the King holiday a groundbreaker because it was the first holiday for a Black American, second only individual ever honored so by our country, our founder, George Washington, and Martin King, who was the completion founder. Okay, because as I'm telling you, we weren't a democracy until we got the Voting Rights Act. You know, those guys sat around in Philadelphia and talked about some good stuff. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The only problem is they didn't intend for it to relate to people that look like me, or to females for that fact, white or black. Okay? But they created a good document and a great concept. Obviously a concept that was a little beyond them. Because as I say, when they were created for them. Not for people that look like me, and not for any female. But The change that we sought was to designate the day as a day of service. And all that means is simply doing something that benefits someone other than yourself. That could be something as simple as having an elderly neighbor who you decide to walk down to the end of the driveway and bring this paper up for them so they don't have to do it. We encourage creativity. So perform an act of service, and then secondly, at least try to meet somebody different than you. And I said meet. You can't force friendships, right? That's just something that has to, develop based on the temperaments of the individuals involved, right? So I'm not telling you, hey, go out, you have to make a friend that's different to you, but meet. Give yourself the opportunity to form a friendship with someone that does not look like you, or someone that maybe is a different religion, or maybe of a different political viewpoint, if you want to properly celebrate the King holiday. Those two things are the best way to do it. We feel pretty good. I might have just mentioned this, but 2010 was the first year that we had 1 million acts of service done on the King holiday, and that's grown every year since. Yes. And a large part of that responsibility in terms of the King Center and King family and leading that initiative fell on my shoulders, and it required a lot of moving around the country, meeting with various King Holiday commissions and just various different communities, and that's where I began to learn what I mentioned earlier about how I figured out I learn more from people that are different from me than people that are the same. But we feel really good about it, and I know that my uncle smiles every holiday because all across America, at least 1 million people are reaching out to do something to help somebody else. If we can successfully get it done on one day, maybe we'll do it for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, till it keeps building up, and until you know it, we're doing it year round. And before you know it, we're not having any more issues about how you look different than me, or you talk different than I do, or you believe in a different God than I do, or your mate is the same sex and mine is not. All of that goes away. And they're telling me now I need to do Q&A, so I'll stop now and do Q&A.
He knows when he sees me. I'm like, okay, wrap it up. So we are going to have an opportunity to do some Q&A for about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, we have a mic, and you get to ask your question, and it could be anything. Family,
yes,
anything. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to hog the mic because I actually have 2 questions.
Yes.
One of them is you mentioned about how important our local government is. And so could you give us an example, maybe just one example, of how our local government impacts us every day?
Everything you can really think about, it impacts you. The quality of water
Yes.
that you get in your home. In your home now. I'm not talking about at the water fountain at the park you go to. I'm talking about the water that comes into your house is impacted by your local government officials. What happens in your community? If you don't want to wake up one morning and find that there's been a strip club built next to your house, you need to be involved with your local officials. Zoning, that would be the case. Excellent. But also, not to tarry on too long, but Atlanta is known in America as the most successful city for black entrepreneurship. We probably, well, at one time that's changing now, thank God, but we probably, for instance, had the largest number of successful black business people or millionaires in Atlanta, in the country. And the reason why that was able to happen is because of the local government. Our local government said, you know, if over a certain amount of money that we spend, you know, 25% of that has either got to be spent with a female business, white or black, or a minority business, right? And that has created, not only for Atlanta blacks, but for Atlanta whites as well, a thriving economy. We had an issue which I was proud the way we resolved it, and this will be the last thing, but local government again. That mayor who implemented that program that was duplicated across the country, he built a national political reputation for it. A guy by the name of Maynard Jackson died about 5 years ago walking through Washington, D.C.'s airport. He was so popular, we wanted to figure out how to honor him. And the most visible thing in Atlanta that we have that's known to the world is our airport, right? It's the world's busiest airport, right? There's more traffic that comes through our airport than anywhere else in the world, right? So everybody knows of Hartsfield. And so everybody said, let's rename the airport after Maynard Jackson. I'm proud to say to you that a majority black city council said, no, we're not going to take Mayor Hartsfield, who was a popular mayor too, white mayor. We're not going to take his name off of the airport. One, because he was a good mayor, but two, we don't want to establish a precedent that, you know, when different people maybe become in charge, we wipe out the history of the past people, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to keep Hartsfield and call it Hartsfield Jackson, right? You know, so your local government is very important.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And the last one is, how do we reignite those who have given up on voting because they don't see, you know, the results? Okay, I voted, don't see the results. And this might not be an answer that you can give directly, but I think all of us need to think about that. How do we reignite? Because people get disappointed. It's like, I'm not going to vote anymore, right?
Listen, the most discouraging thing that I've been hearing for the last few months are, you know, because supposedly, you know, President Biden's ability to become president was enhanced by the fact of just the solid support that he got from American blacks. And the most discouraging thing that I hear is, you know, I don't know if I'm going back to vote again because he ain't done what I think he should have done. And I'm like, okay, so you're telling me, and here again, look, I for the record, politically, I'm an independent. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I was raised by Martin Luther King Sr., who, and by his age, he would say it this way, vote the man, not the party. Okay? So I vote the person, not the party, right? So I needed to say that before I say this. So I'm saying to these people, okay, so you're not going to go back and vote for Joe Biden because he hadn't done what you wanted him to do. So you think you'd be better off right now if President Trump was president? Now, some of you in the audience might think that he would have been better off if President Trump, but for his issues, what he was concerned about, he'd be worse off if President Trump was the president, okay? So, yeah, there is no formula. I think part of it is doing what I'm here doing and doing other places. And what we try to do at the King Center, one is get into these schools, okay? Because the first thing I tell students, even first graders, that the first thing that they have to do the second thing they have to do when they get to high school, driver's license and register to vote. Register to vote, so catching them early and explaining the importance to them about it so that when they, become older and get, exposed to people who don't think like them, they'll have those seeds to keep certifying them. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. So we actually have some questions from students in school that are watching this. So this is a student from, it doesn't say where school he's from, but how was it like having an uncle who made a difference in history?
First off, I forgot they did tell me that schools would be in, and I forgot that. My subject matter might have been a little boring for you all. I'm sorry about that. There are adults here in the room, and so I was impacted by that. But to the question, it's an honor and a pleasure. It never has been a burden, and I think because of the great job that my parents, my grandparents, Aunt Coretta did, in essence telling us, look, be who you are. We're going to teach you right from wrong. We're going to put some principles in you, but you decide what you do with that knowledge. The right thing, you decide what right thing you do with that knowledge. As a matter of fact, my family business, I come from 4 generations of Baptist ministers. And when I was a kid, I said, Granddaddy, I want to grow up to be a preacher like you. And my grandfather said to me, son, that sounds good, but you can't choose to do this. You have to be called to the ministry by God. You cannot decide to be a minister. That's my family business. So I say that to say they did a great job of bolstering us. So I don't feel just because I can't speak as well as Dr. King does, because I can't motivate people like he does, that means there's something wrong with me. And so it's been a point of pride to know I'm related to him. And it's been a point of pride to try to do my part to follow his teachings.
So this is another question. It's a 7th and 8th grade class from Pikes Peak School of Expeditionary Learning. And it's an 8th grader that's asking, when did you know that you wanted to push your uncle's legacy and purpose forward? And when did you know that that was a part of your calling? Good question.
I'd say probably my 7th grade year in elementary school when, for some reason, my classmates just said, hey, we don't need any lecture. We want you to be president of our student government. That was like, it blew me away because I didn't see it coming. But it also flattered me, right? Because some of these, one of the persons who was saying it was what I considered, the school bully. We didn't get along. But he said, yeah. So it started making me think, right? And it started making me connect into my family and what was happening. And then there was always stuff happening with the family. So I think it was, but for me personally, I think that's when I first remember thinking, hey, I've got a role to play maybe here. Yes, ma'am.
Could you please address how Native Americans are on the
Yes.
scale? Because they blacks have been horribly mistreated, but Native Americans have been ignored completely.
They have. But that's why I keep stressing that people really don't understand that none of these rights are black rights. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Civil Rights Act, there are two words you won't find in there, black or white. What you find is majority, minority, right? So yes, I can talk about that. I don't do a comparison like who's been more abused, because the abuse that Native Americans suffered is different. It's the same in a lot of ways, but it's different than the abuse that American blacks have suffered. None is any greater or any lesser. It's just, in a different form. But no question about it, one of the things that I do hate is that America did not get a chance to see my uncle's last campaign. He was going back to Washington, which is why they killed him. Another subject. But he was going back to Washington, and he was bringing more people. And they weren't going for an hour's speech. They were going to camp out. But the thing was, he just wasn't bringing black people. He put a coalition together, Cesar Chavez, the Hispanic community. They were all coming together, all coming back to say, listen, this ain't just a black thing. We're Americans too. We deserve our rights. So yes, Native Americans, but here again, I mentioned Asians, but now Native Americans have been empowered in this, what I call maybe the people of color stage. It's something about that murder. It's fascinating. Something about that murder, it impacted people that they made them start re-looking at things. And it's interesting how that happened. And so there's definitely one of the reasons why President Biden appointed for the first time. We have a Native American in the cabinet. First time in American history. But it's part of this recognition that we're all in it together. And the last group that needs to come on in and join the club are American whites. And that doesn't include y'all here necessarily. But I'm just saying, I mean, and we can just get everybody in, we'd be in good shape. Go ahead, sorry about that. I forgot to cut my phone off.
Other questions? Oh, Percy.
Hey, thank you, Shirley. Hi, I would like your feedback on something that I think is part of the reason why we're here together. It might not be a very important part. You might not consider it. I consider it a crucial part. I might be able to project myself better without this over my mouth. It has to do with what Dr. King said about if we don't learn to live together as brothers and sisters, we will perish together as fools. Mm-hmm. And how is it that we will perish as fools? My opinion is that the major thing that's facing us, the existential threat that is facing us, is the climate catastrophe. And I've just been hearing about a certain county in Texas that just firebombed, or has firebombed, the Democratic Party headquarters down there. And that a group of the people from that county in Texas forced the Biden-Harris campaign bus off the highway. And a message was left saying that the Democrats can have the blue states, but stay out of Texas. And my understanding is the foundation for Texas's importance in the world is fossil fuel extraction, oil, Texas tea, and on the other side of the globe, the largest country, which is controlled by Vladimir Putin, and was profoundly involved in the election of our previous administration, also is dependent greatly on fossil fuel extraction. So I'm saying that with the death of Martin King in '68, we have been, in a sense, been spinning our wheels for that time to the present, struggling with this division that has been perpetrated on us, this black, white, Democrat, Republican, all of this, when it is high time for us to deal with this existential problem that faces us, and it's not an easy solution.
Sure. But let me say this. One, and I have to remind people of it, even with where we are right now, there's been a lot of great progress made. And I say that to say I would take a little exception with you saying that we've just been spinning our wheels. Because even though we have seen the reemergence of some bad racial activity, the divide with most of the majority population of where the divide exists, on the surface it might appear to be racial, but it's not racial for the same reasons that it was in 1960. You had some people who genuinely believed in 1960 that people that looked like me were subhuman. Who truly believed that based on stuff that they had been told. I think everybody recognizes that we all are human beings now, right? I think everybody recognizes that. So now the difference is, even though on the surface it appears a color divide, but really the difference is more philosophical now and political, right? Democrats believe that government has a role to play in your life. Republicans don't. I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong. That's just a fact, right? So, and I can show you the stats on this. Up until 1964, 80% of Americans, 80% of American whites thought the American government was the best thing since sliced bread, and everything they did for them, right? They had no problem if in 1963, not to offend anybody in here who, feels differently about this, but in 1963, if the government had done a vaccine mandate, everybody would have gone and gotten the vaccine because the government said this is good for you. Now, I don't know, some of y'all out there might have not taken the vaccine and you might not believe in it. I'm not trying to criticize you, but I'm just saying, part of the problem that we're having with the vaccine is the fact that it is a mandate from the government. And the reason why it's a problem being a mandate from the government, because since 1964, particularly American whites have steadily distrusted the American government. It went back up briefly to 42% in 1981. No, in 1980. Who can tell? Well, now I'm thinking I'm back into school now. I was about to go into my school routine. But for the kids listening out there, who can tell me what happened in 1964 that made people stop trusting the federal government? Think about that. But for the audience here, it was the passage of the Civil Rights Act. If you don't believe me, check the stats. Literally. When it went back up to 42%, briefly, what happened in 1980? The man who told America that the problem was not, the solution was not the government, but I can't think of how he said it now, and I'm embarrassed to say that. But in essence, he ran on a platform that said, I'm going to keep government out of your life. Now, when did it become a problem for government to be in people's lives, particularly American whites? When the government starts saying, hey, you got to treat black people equally. And if you don't, we're going to have to sanction you. We're going to have to do some things, but we're going to make you treat people decently. So what I'm trying to say to you is, and we're looking at this at the King Center, because the reality of it is, and I don't want to get too deep, this is for another conversation, but, in our last election, more American whites voted for Donald Trump than they did in 2016. And in 2016, the American whites that voted for Donald Trump had voted for Barack Obama. So it ain't about race in that way, in the traditional way. It's about times are changing now. I know how we acted. We're getting ready not to be in control, so are people going to act like we acted when we were in control? There are a lot of questions. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, but did you understand what I was trying to say to you? We're making progress. It's more political now than racial, although it breaks down racially because, we need the government in our lives to make sure that we can live equally. Okay. Maybe we can speak afterwards then. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, where your uncle faced a lot of criticism
Yes.
and violence.
Yes, and where my Aunt Coretta is from.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know how he turned his other cheek sometimes in those instances, but how do you feel like we could better practice nonviolence in our everyday lives?
Well, just in how you resolve conflict. Clearly, I'm sure you're already practicing nonviolence because you're not going around hitting people and attacking them. No, I say that to say, but we can be verbally violent. So one, I think we need to be mindful of how we address each other, even when we don't agree with each other. One thing that I have noticed, and here again, not to offend anybody, but it's just a fact, it's nothing now for us to be looking at the news and people be called liars. Okay? And this has happened since President Trump was elected president. Before he was president, they'd say that you were lying, but they wouldn't call you a liar. John Jones said something that was not true versus John Jones is a liar. I mean, there is a difference in how that is. So one, we've got the language that we use with each other, even when we're talking to friends. We got to be mindful of the language that we use. So that would be the first thing. And then obviously the government things that I've mentioned right now. Yes, ma'am.
Bienvenido, Mr. Farris. Welcome. Yes. Welcome to Colorado.
Yes.
I have just a comment that I was quite disturbed in the news. I'm a CNN junkie. And sometimes when they start with stuff that they repeat, I mute things.
Sure.
But one of the things I just want to get off my chest.
Yes, ma'am.
It was so tragic that in the Harlem fires and the housing where 19 people passed away, and they said they were mostly Muslim folks, and 9 were children. I mean, it just broke my heart as a grandmother to see 9 children were burned to death.
Sure.
Following day, it is announced by President Biden that he is sending $250 million to the Ukraine for aid. And I'm saying, we have a housing crisis in Harlem, in the United States.
Yes.
Why are we sending $250 million to the Ukraine, and we've got 19 people dying and 9 are children?
Yes.
I needed to get that off my chest.
Yes.
My husband is saying, oh my gosh. Yeah, but you know
what? No.
I question that. And I'm a retiree of state government. So
yes.
I know monies can be moved around
yes.
in budgets.
Yes.
But anyway, bienvenido, thank you for coming, and I wanted to get that off my chest.
Yes. You were so right in that, for first off. I think personally right now, we're in a time, even though the world does rely on us so much and we provide so much leadership, we need to concentrate domestically right now. And that's just not economically, but philosophically, politically. Like I said, I mean, and it's starting to, by the way, it's starting to impact our leadership in the world. You know, one of the ways back during the movement, 1960s, that Russia would push back when we played the democracy card, and this, well, look how you treat black people. Who are you to tell me how to treat my people? You got people that can't even vote. We at least let everybody vote. We only give them one choice on the ballot. But I mean, everybody gets a chance to vote. I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? So, and now that has popped back up. You know, we're trying to do some things in the world, and the world's looking at us and, dude, we just saw what happened January the 6th. What are you talking about? You know, you're supposed to be democracy leader, and you got some people who just tried to, you know, invalidate a legitimate election. So, one, I do agree with you. I don't know the specifics, because this is the first time I'm hearing about the 250. So I don't know the specifics of that. I will just offer this, that, you know, I know that President Biden, and I know this from his mouth to my ears, you know, because of the state of things right now, you know, he's got a little more flexibility internationally than he does domestically. And that's not to excuse that or make any excuses, because after that hit my ears, I said to him what I just said to you. It's time to focus here domestically, okay? Because you know, we got some serious issues here, okay? And I'm just not talking about deficits, budget deficits. Yes. So I don't know about that, but you know, I think that might be part of it, that he, you know, he's got more flexibility and he's got freedom. He doesn't have to convince a Joe Manchin or a Kristen Sinema or whoever to support him in doing it. He can just do it. He has the power and the authority. And so sometimes, you know, Oprah Winfrey, for instance, caught a lot of heck when she built the school in Africa for girls. And they were like, well, why aren't you doing that here? And she said, quite frankly, it's easier to do it there. And people are more appreciative there. And they will take more advantage of the opportunity there than they will here. Now, I don't know if that applies to him in that, but, you know, sometimes, you know, it's just easier. Yes, ma'am.
So we will.
You said one more, I thought.
Oh, over here.
Right.
Yeah, but you took your answer so long.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We actually have another school to go to after this at the base, so I want to make sure we get all yours.
I'll make it quick. Was that you, man? Right here in the green? Oh. Right. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I might have missed. He might not have, you know.
Hi there. Thank you. It's a pleasure hearing you speak. And, you know, one of the things I appreciate so much about where you came from is the focus on godly principles.
Yes.
Godly principles that founded our nation,
Yes.
to me, are the division of this nation. Godly principles promote prosperity, freedom, the right to pursue happiness, the right to treat each other with respect and love. And without those God-given rights for people, there's bias, there's racism, there's violence. Without that human correction of our doing right versus doing wrong, that's the division, because Jewish races have been persecuted since the beginning of man, since the start of man.
Yes.
And that's forgotten about. Native
Yes.
Indians, forgotten about.
Yes.
I don't think race is the issue. God doesn't say that race is the issue. He says the human heart is deceiving. That's the issue.
Sure.
To me.
Sure.
I am a follower of Jesus Christ, so I am very passionate about what Martin Luther King stood for. The godly principles of this nation are what creates the capacity for love. Without love, we cannot relate to our differences.
Yes.
We can't do that. We're
Yes.
so hung up on individuality and ourselves and selfish desires.
Yes.
We can't do that.
Yes.
So I appreciate so much what Martin Luther King stands for, because he was popular and one of the finest Americans
Yes.
because he worshiped God our Father.
Yes.
And the principles that promoted health, happiness, prosperity, freedom,
Sure.
love.
Yes. Yes. And yes, thank you for that. I would just.
So my question, I apologize.
Okay.
I do apologize.
Okay, no problem.
I got
No.
a little shaky.
Yeah, no problem.
And
Yes,
passionate.
yes.
I am sorry.
Yes.
I have a problem with critical race theory because of the division it causes with not just blacks and whites,
Sure.
but every single color out there.
Sure.
I have a problem with it. So I would just like you to explain it for me. If you're for it or against it, that's fine, but I just maybe need some clarity on why.
Sure.
What is it?
Sure.
How does it unite
Sure.
instead of divide? Because that's
Sure.
what I don't understand.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I come from 4 generations of Baptist preachers. So my family business is religion in a real way. So I'm a Christian. Having said that, and my uncle was definitely a Christian. Having said that, you are right. The country was definitely inspired by Christian values, but I think those white guys were wise in one way, to say that we should have a clear line between church and state. And I just say that because, America's not only for the Christians, it's for the Buddhists, it's for the Muslims, it's for everyone, right? And so I'm more concerned about protecting your right to practice your religion than trying to convert you to Christianity. I mean, I'm happy to do that. You know what I'm saying? But I'm more concerned about protecting your right to, worship Buddha, if that's who you worship, right? And as long as Buddha's not telling you to go out and shoot people or something, right? Now, critical race theory, I know our time is limited here, so I'll be very quick on that. I support true critical race theory. True critical race theory, first off, is taught in no college or school in America. What you've heard have been lies. It's a postgraduate course that's only taught once you've left college, and depending on what you want to do, you go to a graduate school. That's the only place that it's taught, right? I'm not an expert on it. I've not, examined the curriculum associated with it, but I support it because I support academic freedom. That's what makes America America, right? I mean, the freest place in America should be our colleges, right? That's where you come together and you talk about stuff that's crazy and stuff that's good. And the professor can say you're tripping and you're right and you're wrong. We can write research papers. And so I support activity in colleges, right? That I'm not aware of or don't support. But so one, I want you to know that there's no school system in America on the elementary, high school, or college level that's teaching critical race theory. Please know that. What has happened is critical race theory has been confused with the accurate telling of true history that has, not been told before now. Here again, it's reaching into the divide of where we are. American whites are not understanding that we love this country. It's the only culture that we've known, in part because we were robbed of the culture, right? We were brought here to America, and it's like somebody hit delete, right? They separated us from people who talk like us to make sure that we would eventually lose the language and the history and all of that. So I'm saying, first off, it's really the only culture that we know. I don't call myself an African American, quite frankly, because I'm not. You know, there are people that live in Africa that are my color, but I'm not from Africa, and I'm not giving up what my ancestors paid to make this country great. I'm an American black, okay? And I'm trying to get everybody, if you notice, I didn't say black American, I'm an American black, okay? I'm American first before I'm anything. Right? So, and me know, well, I know it, but it being retaught to me about how people that look like to me were mistreated, it's not going to stop me from wanting to be an American. Okay? And you can't drag me from this country with all the issues. You cannot pay me to live in another country. I love this country. But we got serious problems here. But the good thing is, like I said, we're in the final phase of working it out. We don't have any choice. And that's what's so scary. That's what's happening, right? It really comes down to change is coming, but is the change going to reflect the past? Keep in mind, we had a society that says, based on your skin color, you were privileged. Also, and I'm finishing, Cheryl. This is the last one. But one thing that the demographic change is going to produce, the majority of people in 15 years will speak a second language. America has no official language. I don't know if you're aware of that. We have no official language. So theoretically, the new majority might say, hey, because we live in majority rule country, right? So the new majority theoretically say, hey, well, why don't we just designate the official language as Latinx or Hispanic, however they're referring to it these days, right? Theoretically, okay? And so what's happening now is people are reacting out of fear. It was legal. It was complimented. It was promoted at one time in America that if you were white, you were, better off. As a matter of fact, so many American whites were abused by buying into that stuff, right? No, we're not going to give you the help that you need, but don't worry, at least you're not black. You're white, so tomorrow, what you don't get today, you can get tomorrow, because you're white, right? So, you don't need the government to do this for you and this, that, and the other. Hey, you're privileged. You're part of the privileged class. That's going away now, right? Not only is the privileged class going away, but are the new majority going to act like we did? Are they going to say that, whites now are not the privileged class, they are the bottom class? That's what's happening. But that ain't going to happen. One, I and the King Center, we're going to make sure it don't happen. Right? We ain't going back. We're all God's children. Thank you. All right, I'm ready, Cheryl.